Hi, and welcome to my talk on breaking down complex problems. The reason I've chosen this topic is I believe it's one of the most important skills that people can have when working in software development, because often the problems that we are dealing with are complex, and it's a different way of approaching it than will be done in a traditional waterfall way. So what I'm going to do in this talk is explain the difference between the different types of problems that you can encounter when working in software or in anything in general, and then how you approach those from a complex perspective. And I'm going to give a couple of examples of how that's happened in practice. The first example I'm going to give is, let's say you were working with some software to track the progress of building a software product. One of the things that often comes up is kind of a Kanban board style of item. Um, you want to move tasks when they're completed into a done column. That's very simple. There's no ambiguity there. Very easy to develop. There's no real complexity there. We can make it a bit more challenging by saying, okay, once it goes into done, let's kick off some automation. So we might email some people, we might change some mandatory fields on it, we might auto-populate some fields. We can do a bit of workflow around what happens when it goes into done. And that's a bit more complicated because it requires analysis of what needs to be done, who's impacted, etc. A complex challenge would be create a system that optimizes product development. So those first two examples, that's kind of what people are used to building in software. It's okay, we need to build this workflow, we need to change this. But how do we know that's really optimizing product development? Or how do we know that we're not just automating an inefficient process? So that's the difference between a complex challenge of creating a system that optimizes it versus just ticking the boxes and delivering a system that might not deliver as much value as we could. And then to finish it off, there's chaotic. Would be the fourth category, where there is no system, nobody knows what's happening, everybody's running around and there's no order. So to kind of classify those examples, there's a very simple problem, a complicated problem that it's a bit more challenging, but with a bit of analysis, you can figure out what needs to be done. A complex problem, which is more challenging again, and then chaos. So to those of you who are familiar with the Cynefin framework, this will look familiar because this is the Cynefin framework, which is a way of sense making around problems that you encounter. So by figuring out which box it belongs in, you can determine what's the best way to respond to that. In software development, we tend to be focused on the complicated versus complex problems. With a complicated problem, waterfall is the best way of solving this, because what you need to do with complicated is you need to do a lot of upfront analysis, figure out the full problem space, the domain, and then solve it. With a complex problem, that won't work because with complex, we don't actually know what we need to do. We need to try things out, see what the response is, and then pivot based on what feedback we get. So with that, I'm going to give a couple of examples to try get out of the theory and into the practice of how to do breaking down complex problems. And the three examples I'm going to talk through, one will be on people, a second on process, and a third on technology. So on the people side, I'm going to talk about customers, because when we're building products, that's what we're building for. We're building for our customers, and customers are complex. Just take the example of, what do I want for breakfast today? If I had the exact same thing every day, I'd get very bored. So I like a bit of variety. So it's next to impossible to know, when emotions come into it, what exactly people are going to do until you give them something to react against. The example I'm going to give is Airspace, which was a premium seats short haul offering that Aer Lingus released back in 2019, I believe. And the product is basically, the no frills low cost carriers had changed dramatically the short haul model. In airlines, you used to have the economy part of the cabin and the business part of the cabin. But No Frills Airlines got rid of the business cabin, and it's much more efficient because load factor is incredibly important in airlines. And that's how many people are in the seats on the plane. Because if you fly with empty seats, you're losing money. And by keeping all of the seats the exact same, you could then just drop your prices, change your selling strategy depending on how many seats are booking out. And it's become the dominant model in the airline industry. But because of that, there's now a gap. There are the people who want to pay for a more comfortable flight experience. But with the no frills model, they don't have that option. So this is where this product came in. Basically, it is the same seat, but you're guaranteed that the middle seat would be free. So you have that armrest space, which makes a huge difference for those of you who are familiar with flying back when we used to be able to fly. But this challenge, what I did with the team was I said, okay, let's approach this as if it were a complex problem. How would we do this? If it was a complicated problem, we would do it in a traditional waterfall way. So we would do a detailed analysis phase. And we would look at, okay, what are the different elements? You need to search for your flight. So, okay, let's show the flights that allow this priority boarding or the airspace seats. The bookings listing, we need to be able to show when you see all of the different options. Do I want a regular seat? Do I want the airspace seat? The seat map would need to be changed to show, okay, we're going to hide off these middle seats. There'll be rules for seat selection, etc. The extras, well, if you're getting this seat and it also included meals and things like that, well, we should hide those from the extras because we don't want you to accidentally buy those again or just inconvenience you by showing them. And then managing it. So if you want to change your flight or change your seat, okay, there's a lot of rules there as well. So in a traditional way, we do a very long, detailed analysis phase to figure out exactly everything that needs to happen. But let's see, how would we approach this in a complex manner? So still looking at those kind of core areas, which is the user journey. They think about flying, they search, they book, they pay for any extras that they want, pay for their flight and then fly. Well, the first thing would be to validate the demand. So I'm a big fan of fake door options, which is where you give a button on the website going, would you like to upgrade to get this option? And then you just show them, oh, sorry, we're booked out at the moment. And you would just have that run for a few days as an experiment to see how many people would actually be interested in purchasing this, because you really want to validate if there is a demand before you spend any time or effort in building out this complex system. Second, then, okay, so once we validate that there is demand, what is the simplest product that we can build that can satisfy this? So if we look at the fly column first, that's probably the most complexity here because we have to train all of the staff on how to manage this and how to actually deliver the empty middle seat, the meals, etc., that come with this product. So that's a lot of complexity of training those people. But I'm just going to brush over that because I want to talk about the software side of things. So the booking, the seat map is probably the most complexity. But what if we just got rid of the seat map? What if we just said, if you book this product, we're going to give you one of the airspace seats? That would make it really quick and easy to develop this because we're getting rid of one of the most complex parts. And for upselling all of the extras, that kind of, oh, we have to take some of them off sale and some of them on sale. Why don't we just skip over the whole step? Because again, we're not trying to get this perfect. We're trying to make sure that there is demand for this product. And the MVP versus the fake door option is when people are going to be paying. So it's that extra bit of making sure that there is real demand. Once we validate that, then we can upgrade our marketing, really start promoting this, add in some extras. So give the seat map because it is a better experience. Then we can increase the route options. And the reason why in the MVP we start with a single route is because we don't want to show this to absolutely all of our customers if there is a risk that we're going to pull this. Because after each one of these steps, if it doesn't deliver on the value that we're expecting, we should be considering pulling the product or changing it dramatically. So by limiting it early on, we're limiting the number of customers that could be impacted. And then at the end, it would be testing the extras. So put back in those extras, show different options, see which ones people are interested in. So that's how we would approach it as a complex problem. Now, the team had been very used to working in a more traditional way. So the first reaction, we did this as a team. We got everybody together into the room and said, how do we think we can approach this? And it was a great experience with all the cross functions kind of collaborating quite well, trying to say how we think we should break it down. But at the end of it, the response was, this is really inefficient, because what we're doing is we're building something and then throwing it away. We're building something and we're throwing it away. So the fake door stuff, we throw that away as soon as it's done. The no seat map, well, we're going to throw that logic to skip the seat map away once we introduce the seat map. And the single route versus all the routes, we're going to throw that logic away as well. So it's very inefficient. We're wasting time when we know that this needs to be released for a lot of excuse me, a lot of different routes. So why are we bothering with all of this wasted effort? And the example that I use then for the airline industry is, well, we don't know that we need all of these things until we've gone through these steps, because maybe we don't. We're assuming that there is the demand, but we don't know. And priority boarding is the example that I like to use, because this makes sense as a product. It's referred to as unbundling in the airline industry. A traditional full service carrier offered a lot of perks with a business seat. You had the better seat, you had the priority boarding, you had the lounge access, you had the meals, you had the free drinks. And unbundling is basically where they separate all of those into separate products and sell each one, because maybe somebody doesn't want the lounge, but they do want the nice seat. Maybe they don't want the meal, but they do want the priority boarding. So priority boarding was set up as a product, and it didn't deliver as well as expected. And people weren't 100% sure why, but Ryanair figured it out. Priority boarding, once you have a guaranteed seat, isn't actually that important. What's important is that you get your bag on board. And that's why people were buying the priority boarding. They started talking to their customers, and people were saying, well, I'm buying this because I've had trouble in the past. If I board late, I can't get the bag on and it has to go into the hold, and then I'm delayed. So they repositioned it to be about getting the cabin bag on board. So it's very similar product, different way of how it's presented in the design, and how it's managed at the gates as well. But this meant they had to go back and revisit all of the work that they had done. They had to change their designs, they had to change some development. So all of this rework happened after they had built the product that could have been found out had they built it in the right way first time. And luckily they were able to repurpose the product. In other instances, and unfortunately as an industry as a whole, up to 70% of features are often very rarely used in products. So the first kind of tip, I guess, of breaking down a complex problem is to validate the need. We want to make sure that we're not building and then supporting features that aren't being used and aren't delivering the value. And the reason why it's complex is customers are complex. So let's talk about process. When I joined Aer Lingus, one of the challenges I had was to shift from working in more waterfall way to working as more agile product teams. So you draw up a nice process flow, and it doesn't look that difficult. And one of the challenges is some of the people in the organization we're treating this as a complicated problem versus a complex problem, because they were saying, we have the waterfall process, just write up this kind of product team agile focus process, and we'll just shift over to that and we'll move on from there. So I said, okay, well, let's just talk about what that will entail. So again, it's a user flow, but it's a slightly different user flow. This is the flow of trying to get work done in IT organizations. So finance, who will fund it, you govern your team, analyze dev, and then run it in production. So what we're saying is, okay, well, let's shift some of these things around. So in finance, we need to change it from funding projects to funding outcomes. So we're going to focus on a particular area and we'll improve that. So the governance then needs to change, because we're no longer tracking time and cost. We're tracking, well, how well are we delivering against that outcome that we had said? And our team structure is changing quite dramatically, because we're moving from those kind of teams that just get together for a project disband, to, well, let's give a team dedicated time, long-term time to focus on this outcome. So that changes a lot of how management works in those organizations, because a lot of management goes into allocating and moving those teams around. Then the analysis, we move into that kind of iterative example that I gave before versus the detailed requirements. This makes it complicated from an architecture perspective, because if we have all of these teams working really quickly and iteratively, we can't have a centralized architecture function that takes up becomes a bottleneck of the process, essentially. So we need to create a modular architecture that each of the teams can work on independently. And then we need automated releases. So that will mean that we're touching a huge number of people in the organization. And once you mention people, it becomes a complex problem, because now we're talking about people have different skill sets, they have different innate biases, you have different experiences. Some people could have had a really negative experience with a failed agile project. Other people just don't believe it will work. So you're dealing with a lot of complexity here as you're trying to change a lot of people. So rather than do that, it's, well, let's treat this as a complex problem. So let's not try to change everything at one go. We'll try just get one team, we'll fund one pilot team and try get them working into an agile development approach. So we'll shift from time and cost to, we're not quite doing governance on value, but we're looking at release frequency. We want to be able to be releasing quickly so we can test ideas. We'll try that cross-functional team, we'll try the breakdown of work. We won't be able to fully isolate out the architecture instantly. So let's just look at a horizontal stack. And I mean, most organizations have your UI layer, your services layer, your database layer. So let's just pick one of those horizontals, because it's neater and it's easier to change quickly. And then the ability to release each of those horizontal stacks separately will be a change. So we start there, and then we go to continuous integration. So we merge dev and QA, automated testings. We need to adopt some practices like trunk-based development and feature flags. Then we'll enhance again to continuous delivery. So now, if we're able to be releasing very frequently, let's introduce some new governance metrics around how quickly can we go from an idea to production. And we want to focus on reducing that. So again, we're not really talking about value yet, but we're changing it to be able to be a lot more responsive. And we can spin up automated environments and do a lot more just kind of the technical challenges. Now, once we're in the ability where we can release really quickly, now we can start looking at value. So let's fund outcomes. Let's have our metrics aligned to those outcomes. We'll merge product and UX into this. Previously, it was very IT driven, whereas now we want to be looking at the value of what we're delivering, doing continuous discovery and breaking it into vertical products. So what I mean by that is you get the full vertical stack. So instead of just the UI, services and database, a team owns all in their area. So they have no other dependencies on other teams to release. And then you want to scale that model. So we've talked about doing small pilots. So rather than trying to just do a big bang of change the whole organization at once, we change each team as we go. So the point here is we need to make it easy. If it's too hard, it won't work. People can be overwhelmed by the challenge of trying to break a complex problem. So give people the big picture of, draw a map, a high level map of, well, these are the steps that I want to go through, but let's just ignore everything below step one. Let's focus on step one. Let's get that right. And let's see what happens then. And we can react from there. So you do really want to get people bought in. Again, like I said with the last one, build this map with your colleagues. Don't try to build it independently. So now looking at technology. I often say, and people can get a bit frustrated at this, I always say technology is the easy bit. It's kind of customers and people are the challenging pieces, but which can get a lot of technology people riled up. But technology is complex as well. And I'm going to give an example here of what was a seemingly complicated problem and why it became a complex one. So in Ryanair in 2013, they had the same looking website that they had had for maybe 10 years. It worked, but it was ugly. So in 2014, they did a UI refresh. It's actually the exact same website. All they did was they changed basically the front end layer just to tidy it up and make it look a bit modern. But the challenge that the company was facing was that it was a tangled spaghetti mess beneath the hood. So while the new UI looked very fresh and modern, it was very difficult to get any changes done because if you changed one area, it was causing ripple effects everywhere else. So the idea was let's do a rewrite, but we'll turn it into a very clean services model so that we can change the services independently of the UI and we can bring on mobile, which was gaining popularity then as well. So in 2015, there was another rewrite, but this one was much deeper and it actually involved changing all of the layers underneath the UI as well. So how it got broken out, similar kind of concept. You had the user journey of the marketing pages, which is trying to get demand for it. You search, you book, you check in, you might manage your flight, change your seat, etc. And I've thrown profile in there because it's a good example where if you're trying to build a user journey, sometimes you'll have elements like manage and profile, which don't flow fully into a journey, but it's okay just to attach those on where you think it best fits, because nothing is ever going to be a perfect, clean journey. So it was tackled as a complicated problem. Let's just do a full rewrite of what we're doing. So the marketing pages will introduce a new content management system, because the existing one just isn't fit for purpose. The search, we're going to write search services, checkout services, check-in services, managed services, profile services. And kind of that had a predictable, what people are used to in software, big, large scale software rewrites, the date just kept slipping. So what happened was it was said, okay, well, let's do an initial release. And there was a lot of discussion. This took a very long time to drop manage into a second release. So the idea was if you could get through your booking, then we can sell the tickets. If you want to manage it, you go back into the old website. So you see quite a dramatic difference in how it looks and feels. But the idea was we'd fast follow with the managed services. And what actually happened was, as soon as we released that, we realized, okay, there's a big performance problem. And performance is one of those challenges. Yes, you can do a lot of performance testing, but even your assumptions about how people are going to use it can be incorrect. And that's what happened here. Usage patterns were slightly different. Therefore, the optimization that had been done in the services wasn't fit for purpose. So everything just dropped and it was focused on get the performance problems resolved, which the team did a phenomenal job in doing. Then the next problem was because of the redesign of the UI, and it had been made so much easier for people to check out. Unfortunately, they were checking out without buying a lot of ancillary services. And the model for a low-cost carrier is you make a lot of your profit. You lose money essentially, or close to losing money on the seats, and you make up the profit on the ancillaries. So it shifted then to, well, let's focus on making sure that we can get the revenue back on the ancillaries. And once that was done, Ryanair introduced at this time the My Ryanair product, which is you need to log in order to be able to purchase a flight through Ryanair. And one of the challenges was that, okay, well, this was a brand new product. We didn't know how customers were going to use it. So the focus was on, well, let's improve those profile services. And then a year later, after the initial release, it came down to manage. So the story here is that what you think is the most important might not actually be the most important, because you'll only find out what is the most important when you release early and your customers tell you what is most important. So what's key here is to make it flexible. So as I said in the last step, making it easy, you put out your map of what you think will happen, but you need to be flexible, because after you do your first release, you will learn what's most important and you'll need to be flexible to shift. So everything is priority one until you get customer feedback. So to summarize, how you break down a complex problem, the first thing is to validate the need. You can't treat it that the value is assumed. And that's what happens in a lot of software products. People assume somebody else has done the analysis. I just need to build this feature and it will deliver the value. But if you talk to the people who've done the analysis, they still have a lot of open questions. So they're eager to do the iteration and the testing. So if you can get together and just work together and do that, to validate the need first before moving on, that's step one. Step two is make it easy. It's very easy to be overwhelmed with a complex problem. It seems too hard, like that example of process change in an organization. But that's where, if you can make it easy, if you can make it clear step by step, while also showing the big picture, because the pushback that you'll have if you try to start too simple is, well, what about this problem and what about that? So by having the full picture, you can say, we've considered those problems, but we're just not going to tackle them right now. We're going to start with this, and then we'll move on and we'll get to those eventually. And then make it flexible, because it is going to change. No matter what you think, once you have a complex problem, you're dealing with people, they have complex needs, things are going to change. So I hope you found that valuable. I will be around to answer any of your questions, and I can be contacted on Twitter at RoryUXDX. So thank you very much.